you're paying attention to our walk-on music, you know where we're going. We're going over the rainbow. This session, we will be taking, I hope, what will be a fun and exciting and provocative journey to where we might be 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 plus years from now in diagnosing disease, treating it, and thinking about how medicine might be a completely different thing at that time. So I'm very honored here to have our panelists, who I can't think of anyone better to have this discussion with. To my immediate left, we've got Ajay Verma, who's Vice President of Experimental Medicine at Biogen. Sounds like a fascinating job. And to his left is Geoffrey Ling, Director of the Defense Sciences Office at DARPA.
Biological Technologies Office at DARPA.
Okay, Biological Technologies Office. And Chris Pham from GlaxoSmithKline. And you should probably introduce yourself with your title.
Yes, I'm Vice President of Bioelectronics R&D at GlaxoSmithKline. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I would like to start this discussion with, since we're blue skying it and we're going to jump into the future, nothing's restricted. It's all about what if. So Ajay, I want to start with you and look at drug development. You've had some very exciting and promising news come out about one of your Alzheimer's candidates. So let's start with you to talk about what that means as far as being able to now start the whole process of looking at Alzheimer's early and what that will mean for the trajectory of disease, as well as what that means for drug development. What challenges does that provide? What challenges does that present to us as far as being able to find those patients for whom we want to, target these drugs?
Well, I think, it provides hope, first of all. I think it validates the hypotheses that we've been trying to prove for some time. And it really emboldens us that we can actually get a chink in the armor and make a difference here. I think for the future, though, what we think of as drugs is probably going to change. Right now we find drug targets by looking at pathology or by familial genetics and so on. In the future, it may be actually very different. I think our personal genome sequencing is going to provide a lot of data. A lot of the sporadic diseases that we are faced with are actually multigenic diseases. We may actually find that the best drug targets are modifier genes, or genes that actually, somehow protect against disease, like by studying healthy people. In fact, the success we've had is actually a brainchild of Neuroimmune and Roger Nish. They actually found the genes that what they believed were actually keeping people healthier and mentally stable much longer. And we're able to extract that information and turn that into a drug.
Are we going to be relying increasingly on genetics, do you think? I mean, now we're seeing the emergence of that, but is that going to be just standard?
I think it'll be standard. We'll probably all have our genome sequence at birth, probably identify people very early on.
So you walk in with your medical record, which includes your genome sequence. It shows you exactly where you differ from other people.
And your unique vulnerabilities and traits and so on. And also the environment, how your genes interact with the environment. It may be that if your motor cortex is more active, you're a better athlete, but if you overdo it, you might be susceptible to a certain disease of the motor system.
And that seems to be the biggest challenge. How do we figure out how, for example, you and I may have the same mutation, let's say at point X, but depending on the way I live my life, depending on the way you live your life, we may or may not develop a disease or symptoms in the same way.
So I think it's more and more personalization, measurements, data. How do you make those measurements? The last panel talked about some of the emerging technologies with cell phones and stuff. I actually think by 5 years, cell phones will be a thing of the past. Computers may be a thing of the past. It might all be just us wearing contact lenses and glasses and virtual reality and the Internet of Things actually monitoring us, our home actually telling us if we're sick or not, the grocery store telling us what not to buy and what to buy based on our genomics. We won't let us actually charge our credit card because it's against, something bad for our health.
It's against your genome.
Yeah, it may be. I think that's where we're headed. And I think that's going to come very soon, actually, within the next decade.
So that seems like, on the one hand, you could say that opens up a lot of opportunities. On the other, it could be very limiting. People could see that, can I not buy that kind of food because my genetics won't let me? Or how do you see that playing out?
Well, it's still a free world, but I guess on balance, if it's better for you, it's something you have to buy into, I'm sure. There'll probably be some free will there. But by and large, I think it will be a very different world, and we'll look at it very differently. what we actually call drugs will be different. It won't just be small molecules and biologics. It will be antisense molecules, gene vectors and so on, but combination of things. It might be a drug and some of the technologies my colleagues are going to talk about. It might be a drug in an app, a drug in a software, a drug in a video game that you have to play. And the video game's actually doing your testing for you and giving your doctor the information on how well the drug's working for you. It may be that your pill bottles are actually testing your strength as you're opening them. So it's going to be very different in how we think of delivering overall therapeutics to people and how we actually monitor them, how we prove the value of them, and how we select the patients to give it to. How do we identify those people very early where we can prevent? How do we identify those people that are most likely to be modified by a particular therapy? And if they're beyond that, how do we find the right symptomatic therapies or regenerative therapies, actually?
And Chris, now I want to move to you and talk to you about some of the ways that Ajay was hinting at, that we might look at drugs in combination with completely different strategies for tackling any pathologies in the body. So let's tell me a little bit about what's going on at GSK.
Yeah, it's interesting. Ajay mentions a number of different modalities, smaller molecules, large molecules, gene therapy, cell therapy. We're going after yet another modality, and that is what we call bioelectronic medicines or electroceuticals. That is precision neuromodulation to affect a particular function of a particular organ that is central in disease. So what does that mean more concretely? In our case, we are going after peripheral nerve intervention points. So imagine a grain of rice-sized device that will latch onto a nerve to my spleen or my kidney or my lungs, detect an underlying neural pattern, see if there's a disease signature, and then modulate those neural control signals. Why do we think that is interesting and broad-reaching? Well, I think this audience, perhaps better than any audience, knows how the nervous system reaches out to virtually every organ in our viscera, every corner of the body. It's a control system that is there, just like the immune system is a control system that is there. A signal cascade that we tap into with small molecules is a control system that is in biology. And when we look here sort of to the horizon, beyond the rainbow and so on, it is a matter of time before we can tap into that control system and use that to tackle pathophysiology. And that is our bet. We believe that time is coming, particularly if you take a 10-year plus time horizon. Now is the time to start nailing what neural circuits that control what disease. What's interesting there is that neuroscience then reaches beyond neuropsychiatric disorders. It's treatment through the nervous system rather than diseases of the nervous system, right? And many of the early opportunities we see are in metabolic, cardiovascular, immunoinflammatory, genitourinary disorders, and so on. The last maybe aspect to just highlight what bioelectronic medicines are is that they can be exquisitely specific. If you can address a particular nerve that goes to a certain organ, identify the circuit that controls function X, you have the power of both spatial and temporal precision, if you will. Spatial, obviously, you address a certain nerve that goes to a certain organ. I've spent my research career before in molecular drug discovery, and that's not a precision we particularly often afforded, right? Temporal, through the power of electronics here, you can modulate neural signals in real time. You can respond to underlying neural patterns in real time.
So it gives you a multi-dimensionality. You're saying that molecules can't.
Yeah, it's you have an ability to be very precise in what intervention that you provide, right? And hopefully address one thing, say glucose metabolism, and not many other things. That's of course what we strive for in molecular drug discovery as well, and we try to open up the therapeutic window, but your molecule does distribute typically throughout the body, right? Here you have that precision built in. Now, there are lots of challenges, and Jeff knows better than most how difficult it is to tap into the nervous system and do that with precision. But it is a space that once we do it, that should give us an additional modality. And to come back to the question you asked, Alice, how does this then combine with other therapeutic intervention? Well, it becomes a different axis of intervention, right? Something that will stand on its own right, but also that can be combined with other modalities, if you will.
So there may be a possibility of a molecule, for example, being modulated, turned on or off in a more refined way with an electroceutical.
Yeah, it could be, exactly. The electrical impulses themselves are the treatment. Actually, what's interesting here is that it's almost that the information is a treatment, right? The pattern of electrical signals is not that different from the patterns of bits of digital information. So you have sort of an information treatment, if you will, that you introduce in the nervous system. And then you can have your molecular intervention in parallel with that.
Okay, now you have to forgive my ignorance here, but I'm envisioning, electrodes and things being zapped and things moving around. How, on a practical level, do electroceuticals work? I mean, are we talking ion channels, changes in sort of electrical fields that are very, very tiny? Walk us through a little bit about how these might work.
No, great question. So if you imagine a bundular small nerve close to an organ, let's say my pancreas for as an example, you should imagine a small device, sort of pill-sized or grain of rice size, that you click on around that nerve. It can have a cuff of electrodes. It could potentially have penetrating electrodes or other means by which you can address the nerve fibers that send signals. And that's the so-called neural interface, right? That's what your electronics will speak to, listen to, and stimulate back into. So by doing that, you can detect what is the traffic that goes to my pancreas. You can detect whether that is out of kilter. If we talk about the pancreas, you may also be able to detect other aspects of, say, glucose metabolism through molecular sensing that you can build into a device. And then you go into the neurostimulation. Then you turn up or turn down certain neural signals.
Okay. Now, all of this is predicated, though, on the idea that you have a motherboard. You know where all the circuits are going, and you're pretty sure, I hope, before you start manipulating these things, that you are going to be turning something up, turning X up and Y down, and that you're affecting the very circuits that you want to when you're trying to treat disease. How close are we to having that map or that confidence that we understand and we really know where these nerves go and how to manipulate them?
Yeah. We know surprisingly little, I would say, about the precise innervation of organs, and particularly the signals that go to and from organ. I think we have a significant mapping effort ahead of us here. Just like the Brain Initiative has a significant mapping effort of the CNS, there is a peripheral mapping effort that also needs to happen. That will happen over the next 5 to 10 years. Actually, NIH has taken a very bold move in their so-called SPARK initiative that is seeking to both anatomically and functionally map those neural signals that go to many visceral organs. Now, what's important to remember there is that these nerves typically have single functions, right? It's not like tapping into a computer. You connect with a USB and you can control the whole motherboard, right? If you're on the nerve to my pancreas, you're pretty sure that is sending signals in terms of pancreatic function, right? So the reason why we have at GSK decided to start in the periphery is simply because that's where you have lower complexity of circuits. And then
So
as
more
we learn,
one-to-one connections, in
Indeed.
other words. Okay.
and we of course believe that you can then work your way back, and the ultimate goal, which I'm sure Jeff will come on to, is to understand the whole complexity of the brain, right? And the same principles of detecting signals, analyzing them, and modulating will apply there.
So again, just to reiterate then, with the small molecules, drug treatments that we have today that are they're very popular and relatively effective, the downside is that, a molecule that you want to control, let's say in the pancreas, is also made in the heart or also made in the muscle. And so you're going to be affecting all of those systems, whereas what you're saying is that for neural circuits, the chances for certain ones might be a little higher to be more specific to the actual system or thing that you want to affect.
That's absolutely right. And if you combine that with a whole new mechanism of action, if you will, that we haven't been able to address molecularly before, there you have sort of the novelty power here, which is makes even if it's a long-term pursuit, makes this very attractive to go after.
Okay, great. And Jeff, now I want to turn to you and talk a little bit about, we've got always great interest in science fiction, and we've got, I think, a new movie coming out that's also generating interest again in this idea of the brain-machine interface. And in a conversation you and I had, you mentioned that that people are getting AI and that interface all wrong. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I want to start with first complimenting you on the panel that you put together, because you're attacking very critical disease issues, disordered issues from three synergistic approaches. And the one is dominant over the other. The small molecules, of which Ajay speaks of, electroceuticals, which Chris is speaking of, some of the brain-machine stuff that I'll be talking of, these are all synergistic. So it's part and parcel of a new, broad approach to a lot of the very vexing disorders that the previous panel so eloquently spoke of. But coming back to your specific question of brain-machine, yes, this is a new opportunity for mankind. Absolutely. And why do I say that? And let's go back. Let's think back into what we define as major milestones in human advancement. We think of the Stone Age, we think of the Bronze Age, we think of the Iron Age, and blah, blah, blah. All those things are is an adaptation of tools. That's all that they are. Think about it. It is the ability of man to create tools, to interact with that tools, that leads to advancement of society. And that's exactly what it is. The brain-machine interface is the next big jump in that space. I absolutely believe that. Because for the first time, we're not going to be exogenous to the tools that we use. I see these people banging away on their computers, they're looking at their iPhones, you're using your ink pen as you are. You're using that through a peripheral process. We're talking about directly cognitively controlling the assistive devices of which we speak. And this is a good thing. Do we have that as a predicate? Absolutely. These are tools. That's all these are. Your hands are your tools. Your feet are your tools. Your mouth is a tool. Your eyes are a sensory tool to bring information back in. So we already have these things. But if you think about true capacity, the neural capacity, it's extraordinary. It's beyond belief. We are limited in many ways by the tools that we have to interact with using our hands and our feet. If man wanted to fly, he invented an airplane. Man wanted to move fast, then an automobile. The people out in this audience, some of you are aviators, and you will say that when you fly an aircraft, you feel like you're flying. Certainly all of us know how to drive a motor vehicle, and you know how to move. You don't think about steering the steering wheel, but you think about turning the vehicle. That's what you think about your skiing. You know, when you ski, beginning, of course, was a little kludgy, but ultimately in time, you're flowing with the mountain. So the brain-machine interface is not something to be scared of, it's something to be embraced. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it means is that we have actually gotten to the threshold, in fact, of doing just these things. In one of the DARPA programs we had, which was the prosthetic program, the goal was to develop, of course, a brain-controlled prosthetic limb, and it was very successful. Some of you may have seen it. It was on 60 Minutes and blah, blah, blah. But the point is that the breakthrough there was that it was a cognitively controlled robot arm. They weren't controlling this other thing with a joystick. They, as Jan and Tim, our two patients, were actually thinking about moving their arm and move. Open and close your hand, open and close your hands. We did another step beyond that, which we haven't publicized, but I'll share with you. We actually hooked Jan up to the J-35 Joint Strike Fighter simulator. The J-35 Joint Strike Fighter is the most difficult aircraft known to man right now. It's really hard to fly. I mean, even the known aviators that are in this room right now, if I stuck you in the cockpit of a J-35, it's going to be kind of hard to get level flight. Jan had level flight immediately. Immediately. And if you talk to her, and now she's quadriplegic, and she never had a flying lesson in her entire life. But when we hooked her up to the J-35 Joint Strike Fighter, she flew it because she was thinking about the way we drive our cars. When you bank right, it banks right. When you bank left, it banks left. When you climb, it climbs. When you dive, it dives, and on it goes. The experience is a synergistic experience. This is a wonderful thing. So what it means is it opens tremendous opportunity in terms of the kind of assistive devices, not just for health, but for everything that we can think of. I agree completely with JJ. I think the iPhone you're going to have is a piece of junk. I think that it's going to go. Think about it. I mean, I got fat fingers. I mean, think about trying to dial the daggone thing. I mean, it's make them really seriously. And the autocorrect, oh my goodness. I've gotten so much trouble with my wife over autocorrect, I can't even tell you. So, and so we all think it's a wonderful thing. But what I'm saying to you is I agree completely with AJ that that is a thing of the past. You know, it is something that its time was very valuable, but it's going to come to go away because we're going to have a new way of interacting with assistive devices. As far as AI goes, I think that people who think that we're going to create a machine and just turn it loose are insane. I mean, who in their right mind would do that? Why would you do that? I mean, seriously, why would you do that? When you could be synergistic with that machine. Imagine Einstein if he had the laptop that is in this fellow in the front row right now. If he had that, not a pencil and paper, but he had that laptop and what it could do. Instead now, what we're saying is the next generation of scientists will be synergistic with their machines. What does that mean? It means that we'll be able to get data into the brain, which can process at extraordinary rates. We know this. Without being limited by the eyes, the mouth, the ears, the nose. I think the Google Glass is a piece of trash. Why? Because it's got to go through the eyes. In the end, that is a funnel. It's a constrictor of data flow input. If I could go directly into the brain, then I could bypass it. I could put it in not, you know, your eyes and your nose, you guys know this, is working about a kilobytes per second frame rate, whereas your brain is actually more like a terabyte per millisecond computational rate. We need to match that. If we match that, think about how enabling that would be. AI is a way of offloading some of the mundane things to allow your cognitive capacity to do other things. I think that we're going to be synergistic with these devices. I don't know why anybody would abdicate. I think what Chris is talking about is really the first step into that. What Chris is talking about is a thermostat. It's actually a thermostat. Be able to measure what's going on in your body and to directly intervene as appropriately, coupled with the things that AJ's doing. I mean, we're now talking about an opportunity space, an armamentarium that physicians never had before. And when do I think it's going to happen? Within the next 10 years.
Okay, so what you're saying is that we're going to be, why bother having a body? We just need a brain, right?
We're neurologists. I totally agree with that, Paul. And the problem is, AJ, do you disagree with that?
No,
Chris? You know?
I enjoy having a body. I could have a virtual body. I could have a body a new body every day.
Well, that's the
I just,
idea.
you know.
That would be the idea, that they're the physical manifestation.
But again, you know, it's not either
extraneous.
or, Alice. It's not either or. What we're saying is added capacity. Right? It's not either or. Right? I mean, now we all have cars and Segways. Why do we bother walking? I mean, you know, so it is an either. It's not an either or. It's an augmentation. I would say this. If you want me to say bold statements, I believe in this room, the children that we have who are, let's say, in their pre-teen age, for sure they're going to live to 125 with good quality of life. There's no doubt in my mind. The frailty, the elderly who have frail bodies, that is not going to be the issue because we are going to have assistive devices controlled the way of which I speak that are going to give them the ability to go ski when they're 90 years old, the ability to go run when they're 101 years old. I don't see that as an issue at all. We have to meet some of certainly the systemic diseases of which we spoke of. We have to talk about some of the dementias, but not everybody's demented. My 85-year-old mother, who by the way was an engineer on the U.S. space program, she's not demented. She can still do calculus, which is amazing to me because I can't. So, but her body is frail. She has frailty. That's what elderly people have. We can overcome that. If we can overcome that and give them the quality of life of which they have earned, I think that's a worthy endeavor. So I actually see this as a liberation of our bodies, not the fact that we're going to abdicate them. I think that we're going to liberate them. We're going to do many more things with the bodies that we have.
But the idea here then is, and this is one thing I'd like to ask all of you to address, which is the difference, that line between addressing disease, treatment, and augmenting or enhancing the human condition. Because I think once we get to a point where it's possible to have a brain-derived or brain-driven system, and we can overcome the frailties of our physical selves, once it's possible that we have drugs that are sensing all kinds of things and just sort of taking all kinds of information on, let's say, like the opening of a bottle cap. once we have electroceuticals that can specifically target certain systems. It's a very easy jump to, well, let's make it better. Why just be satisfied with the average condition? Why not the superhuman, the super strength, the super muscles, the super brain?
Why not?
Why not?
I mean, you have to think about what is the average condition. Why do we age? Why do we get sick? This may be a legacy of genetic, evolution to get the old out of the way to make room for the young, right? I mean, there's a lot of animals that right after they reach reproductive maturity, everything starts to wind down. A lot of that's managed. Now, we've outgrown our genetic constraints. We've, changed so much in the last 200 years. We've gone from about 200,000 people to 7 billion people just in 200 years. Our genes haven't had time to adapt. When we used to have droughts, it was good to, be able to retain water. Now you get hypertension from it. When you had famines, it was good to be fat. Now there's no more famines, so it's a liability. So maybe there's some, liabilities that we're carrying because we're changing our environment. So our fitness to the environment is actually a different equation now. So why not? And maybe it is possible to find those genes and those mechanisms that are actually doing us in on purpose, the means to our own ends, and change that, and liberate ourselves from some of the genetic constraints that we have. If we really want to think blue sky, I think those are possibilities, and we'll probably in our lifetime have the opportunity to ask those questions, face those issues, make those decisions.
I think it's one day we will, and maybe soon we will face that ethical dilemma of what enhancements should we allow, and we have to take that decision head on, just like we're taking it in when we talked about gene therapy and many other aspects. I would underline though that we have a lot of diseases to treat first, right? And let's start there. That's always been the right way to do it. That's when we can bring a lot of benefit to society. People with pacemakers and ICDs in the world, we don't think of them as Robocops or Terminators, right? That's revolutionized cardiology. Let's revolutionize a number of other disease areas. And I think there's no doubt in anyone's mind that it's the right thing to do, right? We don't have a big ethical challenge there. On the contrary, we have an obligation to bring those technologies, particularly if it is more precision medicines with less side effects. And I hope that is sort of going to carry the day here, right? That we don't get caught up in this obsession of creating some superhuman here, when in reality we have in these sort of interventions the power of making much better medicines and treating diseases. And then maybe when we're done treating all the diseases that preoccupy all of us, then we can go and make Superman after that.
Well, Chris, I also wanted to ask you to address the question of why a pharmaceutical company that is known and has traditionally built its reputation on small molecules, what is it about now that is the time to start thinking about, is this the way we should continue to go in the next decade or so? What is it about things that you are seeing in the industry that make something like an electroceutical worth investing in, worth pursuing, worth putting research dollars into?
Yeah, no, great question. And it is a question of when is the right time to pursue something like this. So first, GSK, like many other healthcare companies, we have a number of modalities, like Ajay was referring to before. We're a small molecule company, we're a vaccines company, we're a protein therapeutics company, and we do continuously look at what are new ways of having a treatment effect. And many companies have kept their eyes open and said that's going to be gene therapy or cell therapy or what have you. We came to the view that neuromodulation, and particularly precision neuromodulation, is coming on leaps and bounds. It's driven by lots of the good work that has been done by DARPA. It's including how to control prosthetic limbs and so on. There are cochlear implants and retinal implants and so on that we're familiar with. That type of technology, there's nothing that prevents that sort of neural interfacing to also be brought to bear on the main chronic diseases that are sort of centered on visceral organs. And when we tried to future gaze here 10, 20 years out and saw the trajectory of those technologies, compared that to what we knew of the control of our physiology, which frankly, in our company, we sort of had to go back a bit to textbooks, and because we sort of forgotten the innovation of many of organs that we were working on very actively with molecular interventions, right? But when we had those two pieces next to each other, and we said, okay, so what is a new modality here the next 10 to 20 years, and what is an area where we can go in as a pioneer and reap the benefits, hopefully, of being a pioneer, then it was a quite obvious choice.
No.
I think it does require, though, it requires a long-term mindset. This is not an area you go in and say, okay, I want to return in 3 to 5 years. We all know that any molecular drug discovery doesn't work on those timescales either. I think if you take a 10 to 20-year time horizon here, our bet is that now is the right time to enter.
Now, would there be any synergy, Jeff, and maybe you can jump in here, in looking at the work, for example, that DARPA is doing here? Ling, you said that we would still need this network, and we're sort of not quite there yet as far as having that map, and that mapping work needs to be done. Jeff, maybe you can address how much of that you feel, how far we've come there and how far we still need to go, and whether there's potentially any chance for interface or collaboration between private industry, government, to create those maps and take advantage of them.
So this, what Chris is speaking of, is a model, in fact, for public-private cooperation. And he spoke of NIH having something called the SPARKS program, which is an effort to fund investigators in this field to look at the fundamental science that would underline many of the things that Chris speaks of. That's actually coming in parallel with something we call the Electrics program. The Electrics program is a new program we're starting, so that means there are funding opportunities for even some of the folks in this audience. That's public money, and that is to develop the technological platforms that will enable leveraging against the knowledge that's being built in the SPARKS program. So there's two elements going on here. One is the techno build, as well as understanding the biology. I think they can go in parallel. They don't have to go in series. So this is a good thing. Having GSK involved is an exceptional opportunity, because at the end of the day, somebody's going to have to make this thing. Somebody's going to have to get it through the FDA. Somebody's going to have to think about the practicality of it all. And that's not a small feat. That's a very, very hard thing to do. And so companies such as GSK, companies such as Ajay's companies, and many of the others that are still out there, the Medtronics in the world and so on and so forth, the Boston Scientifics, they have to be involved in this, or this will not make it into the clinic. It just simply won't, because it is onerous to go through the secondary process of regulation and then ultimately manufacturing, distribution, and the like. The fact that industry, the private side, and the public side, NIH, DARPA, NSF, this is good. This is very, very good, because what it means is it's an efficiency of the process. And I believe that it's through this that we're actually going to be able to get these things into taking care of the patients, that what really was what motivates all of us.
In addition to talking about the innovation of the research too, I mean, you're touching upon, what do you see are the challenges as far as making that happen, those private-public partnerships, the regulation? What innovations need to be, occur there to push technologies, ideas, platforms like this forward?
I'm going to let Chris answer that, because that is a pull part. That's really, and Ajay, because that's the industry part.
Yeah. No, first, let me just add to what Jeff said about creating that sort of virtuous cycle here. I think it's been really important for this field just over the last couple of years to have, on one hand, these game-changing initiatives from DARPA and NIH that sort of create the foundational research and technology and the map. And on one hand, a number of industry players stepping up and saying, we want to translate this, right? If you get that right, then it really strengthens the case to do the foundational research, because there's someone downstream who want to pick it up. And it strengthens our case to sort of commit to this area, because we know that this is not a one-trick pony. There are researchers that are going to be funded by NIH and DARPA, who are really going to keep on bringing technology and biology.
Well, and the public and the government and the regulatory agents have to be on board with it, right?
Indeed.
I mean, if the public isn't on board with this idea and are still uncomfortable with any sort of manipulation, whether it's electroceutical or whether it's, you know, brain machine, which we're seeing, you know, so there's a social ethical evolution that has to occur along with the technological, right? And I'd like to ask you to address that, since we're talking about future and since we're looking at, you know, things that still have yet to become. We can't ignore the fact that in order to make all this happen, we need to have a population, we need to have a regulatory system, we need to have a legislative system that is ready to accept it.
I mean, I'll take that on. I think this is happening already. I think the pressures that we're facing now with demographics of aging, just the burden of disease and dementia right now, it's just too overwhelming to ignore. So I think there's a lot of public pressure. A lot of the technologies that we're talking about are already being embraced by our youth today. You know, there's over 100 EEG games you can buy on the internet right now. There's all these little EEG devices. So people are using these for entertainment already. There's a whole biopunk movement. Actually, it's pretty big in Boston. People are implanting NFC chips so they can open doors and turn on, you know, stuff. Taking certain vitamin analogs at high doses to be able to see ultraviolet, and so this is actually happening, you know, amongst the population already. So I think the public is really, I kid you not. I mean, I don't know if it's wise to be, you know, to have it unregulated, but I think a lot of our patients are actually ahead of us in this. They're already embracing some of these technologies, and maybe we need to really listen to them and see what they're willing to accept.
The idea of enhancing the human condition. So
Yes.
why be limited, as Jeff is saying, by what
But you
we
know,
have?
the thing is that this is a worthy discussion to have. The ELSI, so we at DARPA, and I know NIH has done the same, and the president has done the same with his ethics commission, and I know the companies do the same thing too, but at DARPA, we actually have an ELSI panel, ethical, legal, social implications panel. And this is something we take very seriously because, you know, we were the agency that first started the internet. And I mean, that's what DARPA is famous for, among other things. But I will absolutely assure you that J.C. Licklider, who many of you don't even know who he is, he's actually the DARPA guy that initiated the internet effort back in 1963. And J.C. Licklider, I can absolutely promise you, not think that there would be some sort of miscreant using his internet for child pornography. But things like that happen. And it's not enough to stop the progress, but what we should do is learn from that. And so the ELSI panels, ethical, legal, social implication panels, are there to open the discussion so that we can actually sit down and say, what are the potential untold effects of all of the things that we're trying to do here? And once we're informed, we can then move forward in the development, but now we're informed. There was an old saying here, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. And I think that's how we sort of have to look at this. These things are coming, they are happening. And as AJ points out so well, that they're already being embraced, not by everybody, but by some people. And what we have to do is then understand what are the potential negative consequences so that we can be ready to address them as they appear. I mean, Chris,
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, let's not be held back by this fear, right? I mean, going back to the pacemaker example, if you're afraid that your pacemaker is going to be hacked or it's going to be abused, and that held back pacemakers, we should all be ashamed if that had happened a number of years ago, right? That mentality has to be here as well. Let's work out what the negative consequences are. Let's be responsible. That is between industry, that is the research community, that is regulators, that is with patients and physicians and so on, and move the research on at the same time.
I wanted to come back to one topic earlier about the synergy between, you know, the nervous system is, you know, electricity, plumbing, chemistry. So yes, there's synergy there. But also this is an academic setting here that we're in. And it's always bothered me that, you know, developing therapeutics has always been a second career for most academic physicians. And so I think we actually need to change the mindset of how we actually approach therapeutics and therapeutic development. Why aren't people taking their boards in drug development? You know, why does it have to be the second career? Why do Jeff and I have to, you know, do a residency one thing and go off and do a second career? Why don't we teach these kind of concepts and these ethical dilemmas, you know, to the students as they're coming up? And we really look forward to academia taking on some of those challenges.
And that's part of this idea of rethinking drugs and medications and therapeutics for the future, that it may not just be a chemistry equation or chemistry problem that needs to be solved, but as you're saying, that it could involve the electrical system, the nervous system. And Chris, I wanted to, in relation to that, to address something that you touched upon, which is the idea that it may seem odd to look at a nervous system-based approach for something like diabetes, which isn't immediately apparent to be it's a metabolic disorder, and most people understand it as such. It's not a nervous system disorder. Talk to us a little bit about how that platform is going to help and open up our ability to really look at other chronic diseases that may not necessarily originate in the nervous system.
Yeah, it has been very interesting and enlightening for us the last couple of years as we have looked at various organ in our viscera to see the extent that the nervous system has control over various functions. So it seems odd that diabetes can be controlled by the nervous system, but yes, the liver, the pancreas, the GI tract are innervated, and once you think about that, then it isn't that strange anymore. I think the next thing to overcome is, of course, why would a patient want an implant instead of taking their sulfonylurea or getting their insulin injection? There's a big task for the innovation community, right? We cannot stop by finding a nerve and then saying that this is going to be this big clunky device that is going to be implanted, and there are going to be leads pulled in different directions, and you need to go to the best neurosurgeon at Mass Gen to do it. I mean, that shouldn't be the goal. If we want to address type 2 diabetes, it should be a 15-minute outpatient procedure that can be done in a small hospital in India. Otherwise, we're not actually helping these conditions. So there's a lot of innovation that needs to happen. Then there's a mindset change that needs to happen. I think, and I don't know if it's an industry that I represent that is to blame, but we sort of got into the view that taking an oral pill is not particularly invasive, but implanting something is invasive, right? And I'm not sure a generation from now it's going to feel like that anymore, right? I mean, you take a chemical that spreads all over your body versus you do a keyhole surgery and latch on a miniaturized device on a nerve. What's more invasive? There, I think we will see a mindset shift, and which probably will take time, but we need to get the right devices to do that.
That's if we need those devices. I mean, we're predicating our idea that we're going to need this grain. We may not even need that. I mean, if we know where the signals need to go, we know precisely the ionic environment of which the signal resides, there's no reason why we can't come up with an external device that could both stimulate and also record. I mean, we do this all the time. I mean, we do it from drones from 50,000 feet. And so there's no reason why we couldn't do it here. So I don't want to get wrapped up into the invasivity of what potentially we're thinking about today. I think what is more important is to hear the concept that Chris is starting to bring out, and that is that we can actually treat diseases by going through the nervous system, and then some of the concepts that Ajay is speaking about in terms of genetics. I think the technological platforms of which they're going to be based on we don't even know what they are right now. I mean, seriously, but I believe they're going to be less and less and less and less invasive, in my personal opinion. I believe some of the things that we talk about are maybe just a little thing that you may wear on your wrist, like a wristwatch or a ball cap or whatever. So don't get tied up into the invasivity of this.
So the issue of, I was going to ask you to detail a little more about that example you provided about the patient who was able to drive a jet fighter. How do you get to the point where you are able to basically pick out those circuits, those thoughts, so to speak, that are relevant to the task at hand? That seems to be the big issue, is that, she could be thinking, I'm really thirsty right now, or this room is really warm. How do you get, for something as complex as the brain that's so multifunctional, how are you able to pinpoint the circuits you need to achieve a certain function?
So what the nice thing, the way the brain operates, is that it works at many different levels across a very broad area, across the entire cortex. The other thing that's very nice is that you're dealing with people. So people can tell you what they're thinking. right? They can tell you what their intent is. That's why when you look at the progress of the work, it took years to go from the monkey into the human. It took literally months to go from fairly kludgy, 7 months to be exact, to go from a very kludgy type of motor control to a very dexterous motor control. It took 7 months. 7 months. And from when we first did the very first patient to the 60 Minutes piece where she was bumping fists and shaking hands and yada, yada, yada. The point about that is that's because now the patient was able to inform what she was thinking, and then we were able to look at the neuronal firing patterns and come up with the algorithmic codes that were based around that. And the beautiful thing about this whole process is the universality of it. People rarely ask me, oh, geez, in the original patient, where did you get the algorithms to decode those things? And where did Andy Schwartz, Dr. Schwartz, get those? He got them from the monkeys. He got them from the monkeys. So it tells you that the way we code is, and then you find, what's the difference between Tim and Jan? And in fact, you find the homology is well over 80%. So the beauty of this is that the systems that we like to think how individually are, we're not. Biological systems, by and large, can be described by math, just like the celestial bodies can be described by math. You know, and these are the breakthrough concepts that we have to understand, that biology in itself is ceasing to become a phenomenology and more of a quantitative science. That's why these two guys are able to do the things that they do. If this was just guesswork and only worked on specific individuals, it would never work. The fact of the matter is that that's the beauty of where biology is right now, which medicine is that it's becoming quantitative. So all those things are coming to place so that when you understand from a mathematical level what in fact these neuronal codes mean, it doesn't matter where you record them from. I mean, it does help, of course, to be over the motor cortex or over the sensory cortex and the like, but at the end of the day, the beautiful thing about it is that if it is, when you look at the moon, you don't have to look at the moon if you knew well the math of how the moon orbits. That you could go into a cave for a few days, and come back and say, the moon's gonna be over there, and sure enough, it's over there. So it's the quantitative ability to understand the neuronal field activity and the like that's evolving, that is making this all possible. It's making certainly Chris's work very, it certainly makes it so that it is now a tractable problem as opposed to an impossible problem. If it wasn't, then it'd be all guesswork, and it's not guesswork. There's science behind this.
There may be you may not need to know some circuits. You know, we weren't evolved to read. We invented reading, and certain circuits took over that function and mastered it. And so there could be all kinds of excess capacity that will just take on a new task, you know. My daughter can fly a little toy helicopter with an EEG. You know, it's just a simple little toy. It's not that she's activating some circuit. She has learned to either concentrate or meditate. And just through that somehow control a little toy. So maybe that we actually have a lot more capacity than, you know, we weren't born to swing a golf club, but we fired those circuits, we hone them, we neuroplasticity, we adapt it. So in addition to having them, they may be actually very plastic and adaptable for a particular task.
Now, in our final few minutes, I just wanted to ask you, since this is a forum focused on neuroscience, and we're facing one of the largest chronic conditions, Alzheimer's, in our population in coming decades. 10, 20 years from now, Ajay, what treatments, therapies for Alzheimer's do you envision? How are we treating the disease then?
I think much like in cardiology, we'll have a multitude of treatments. We'll have biomarkers. We'll actually manage biomarkers rather than the patient, just like we manage blood pressure or glucose levels or something. It may be an imaging biomarker, maybe a cognitive biomarker. So I think we'll be able to identify people very early, give them something like the equivalent of a statin to ward off as much as we can. Those that are further along will probably know the specific endophenotypes that they're most likely susceptible to, whether it's A-beta or tau or inflammation or something else, customize the treatment to modify it. I think the people I'm worried about most are the late stage Alzheimer's, because the field is going earlier and earlier, that it's almost becoming orphanized. And so we'll need new thinking then beyond symptomatics. You know, can we regenerate nervous, tissue? Can we adapt some of the technologies that Jeff and Chris are developing? Can we put chips in the brain or whatever these guys come up with to complement, to reverse or complement, I mean, if you look at Parkinson's, we're actually doing surgery to correct an abnormality. Could we find some approach like that in Alzheimer's? Correct some circuit that allows you to regain memory again? I don't know, but I think we'll have all those options on the table. I think cardiology is a great example for us in using all modalities that are available, and that'll be the future in neurology.
Jeff?
I would just reiterate what Ajay said. I think the key point here is that this is a multifaceted problem, even though it's just in the brain and it's reflective of a lot of again, amyloid deposition and stuff. But it's actually a fairly pervasive disease, and it's going to require multiple approaches to take advantage of it. The early stages is genetics. I think some of the advanced stages is going to be some of the electroceuticals as applied to the brain. And I think that at the end of the day, maybe we'll be able to jump some of these circuits and be able to offload, I said, some of the cognitive capacity or the cognitive load onto an assistive device that could actually help the patient. So there are many different levels to this answer.
Or use the idea of cognitive resilience, right?
Absolutely.
Reserve, which a lot of people are talking about now, that helps certain people feel the symptoms of Alzheimer's less and show the symptoms less. Chris?
Yeah, I think Jeff and Ajay have said this well. Where there's a global imbalance of something, be that plaque buildup or what have you, then I don't think bioelectronic medicines that I've described have much to offer, but there can probably be an additive effect of upregulating certain circuits. And that's what I would expect maybe here in 10, 20 years we can add on to the great work that Ajay and others are doing right now.
So if we find an amyloid suppressor or some circuit that inhibits the production of amyloid or tau.
That's right.
Okay. Well, I want to thank our panelists here for taking us to the future. It was very, very interesting and provocative and very inspiring, and I invite you to engage them throughout the forum if you'd like to dream about the future. Thank you.